Once upon a time, there was a young woman named Susan. She had battled with anxiety and depression for as long as she could remember. As she grew older, her anxiety only got worse. It felt like it took over her life, and no matter what she did, her worries always seemed to win. Susan felt trapped, like she was stuck in her own mind. She feared that if she didn't find a way out soon, her life would never get better. She had tried everything to feel better. She took medications, practiced breathing exercises, counted to calm herself, and even went to therapy. But nothing seemed to work for long. The dark cloud of anxiety would always return, leaving her feeling hopeless. One day, while walking through the park, Susan noticed a yoga class happening outside. She stopped and watched, drawn in by the graceful movements, the slow stretches, and the peaceful way the participants focused on their breath. For the first time in years, Susan felt a sense of peace. It was only for a moment, but it gave her hope. Maybe, just maybe, yoga could help her like it had helped others in the class. Could this be the answer she had been searching for? The next day, despite the doubts swirling in her mind, Susan made up her mind to try yoga. She was in her mid-20s, living a lonely life with no close friends, and working from home because the thought of stepping into an office felt too overwhelming. She often dreamed of having a life like others her age, going out with friends, having fun, or even dating. But every day felt like an uphill battle. Some days, even getting out of bed seemed like a huge challenge. Still, after seeing that yoga class in the park, Susan felt a flicker of hope. The night before, she bought a yoga mat and new gym clothes. She told herself that no matter how nervous she was, she would go and give it a try. But as the night passed, her mind was filled with worries. Would others judge her? Could she do the poses? What if she made a fool of herself? When the alarm went off the next morning, Susan almost stayed in bed, overwhelmed by fear. The mat sat in the corner of her living room, reminding her of everything she was too scared to try. But after a deep breath, she put on her gym clothes and grabbed the mat. She realized that if she didn't try now, she might never know if yoga could be the answer she'd been searching for. When she arrived at the park, Susan felt a mix of excitement and nerves. She unrolled her mat at the back of the group, still hearing doubts racing through her mind. But as the class began, and she started following along with the instructor and the other participants, something surprising happened. The more she focused on her breath and the movements, the more her anxiety began to fade away. It didn't vanish entirely, but for the first time in a long while, Susan felt a sense of calm. She wasn't completely free of her worries, but she felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. By the end of the class, she was smiling, something she hadn't done in ages, and her heart felt a little bit brighter. After that first class, Susan kept returning to yoga. It became something she looked forward to, a place where she could finally feel some peace. Her anxiety was still there, lurking in the background, but it didn't control her like before. She started going to the office twice a week, something she had avoided for so long. She even started having coffee with some of the women from her yoga class. For the first time in years, Susan felt connected to the world again. She even began talking to a man she had met at the park, and they were planning their first date. Things weren't perfect, but they were better. Then, one day during yoga class, a dog ran into the group, distracting everyone. But instead of feeling frustrated or anxious, Susan laughed. The little interruptions no longer bothered her. She realized that yoga had taught her to stay calm, even when things didn't go as planned. However, after almost a year of attending yoga classes, Susan's anxiety suddenly returned with a vengeance. It felt like everything she had worked so hard to overcome was slipping through her fingers. She stopped going to the office again, and her yoga mat was left gathering dust in the corner of her living room. Her mind was filled with worries, and she found it nearly impossible to focus on anything, let alone yoga. She felt frustrated, defeated, and more isolated than ever before. Her friends, noticing her absence, came over to visit. They spent the afternoon with her, lifting her spirits and reminding her that she wasn't alone. During their visit, they suggested that Susan consider getting a therapy dog. At first, Susan brushed it off, unsure how it would help. But as time went on, she grew more curious and began researching it. Yet, she knew before she could seriously consider a therapy dog, she needed to get back to yoga. The next morning, with the sun shining brightly, Susan made the decision to try again. She dusted off her yoga mat, slipped into her gym clothes, and walked to the park, feeling a small spark of hope. When she arrived, her friends greeted her with warm smiles, making her feel like she belonged. As the class began, something unexpected happened. A large dog ran into the group, barking and causing chaos. But as Susan looked at the dog, she saw something familiar, the fear in its eyes. It wasn't aggressive, it was just scary. As the dog barked and growled, the whole group froze, but Susan stayed calm. She focused on her breathing, keeping her attention on the yoga poses. The dog's growls didn't distract her. Slowly, the dog inched closer to her mat. Susan's heart raced as she held her breath, unsure of what would happen next. But instead of attacking, the dog stopped growling and lay down quietly next to her. Susan, still shaking, continued her yoga routine, her movements steady. To her surprise, the dog seemed to be watching her closely. It began mimicking her movements. As Susan reached for the sky with outstretched arms, the dog lifted its front paws in the air, as if trying to copy her. Susan gently reached down and stroked the dog's ears. The tension that had once filled the air faded away, and the dog's anger seemed to disappear. The rest of the class watched in awe as the dog followed Susan's every move. It was like a beautiful dance between them. The instructor, who had been recording the class, captured the whole moment on video. By the end of the session, Susan and the dog had become the stars of the class. The instructor asked if she could share the video on social media, and Susan agreed. Little did she know, the video would go viral, drawing attention from people everywhere. But as the class ended, Susan realized she had a new problem: what to do with the dog. As she was walking to the shelter, two men in uniforms approached her. They explained that they had been searching for the dog ever since it escaped from the shelter. The dog had been rescued from the home of an elderly man who had passed away. For days, the dog had been alone and scared, and when they took it to the shelter, it panicked and managed to escape. Susan had been right all along. The dog was terrified, just like she had been for so many years. At that moment, everything clicked for Susan. This wasn't how she had imagined getting a therapy dog, but somehow, it felt like the universe had guided her to this moment. She wanted to adopt the dog, and she knew it was the right decision. The shelter was more than happy to let her adopt the dog after confirming that she was capable of providing a loving home. Susan passed all the checks, and soon she was holding the leash of her new companion, a dog she named Luke. It was clear that building trust between them would take time, but Susan was determined. She understood the challenges of anxiety all too well, and she knew she could help Luke feel safe again. As she started training Luke to become a therapy dog, Susan also created a social media account for him. She shared their journey, the excitement of bringing Luke into her home, and the importance of understanding anxiety, both in humans and animals. People followed along, cheering for their progress. The viral video of Susan and Luke doing yoga together continued to inspire others, showing the deep connection they had formed. In the end, Susan realized that yoga hadn't just changed her life, it had brought her exactly what she needed in the most unexpected way. Together, Susan and Luke would face their struggles with anxiety, supporting each other every step of the way. That's all for today. If you found Ciara's story moving, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more heartwarming animal tales here on the Animal World. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching.